Hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss Vabb, and I'm going to explain what that means in a minute. And this is all coming from chapter 1 in your book. And from this point on in this course, we spent a lot of time looking inward, right? We've looked at our own cultures, we've identified how we define culture, we've looked at our biases, and now we are going to go on our journey of being an inclusive instructor by actually looking at the methods that we use in our classrooms. So what is VAB? VAB stands for validation, affirmation, building, and bridging. Validate, to make legitimate that which the institution and mainstream has made illegitimate, such as situational appropriateness, like code switching. How many of our students say words like ain't, dis, dat, I be when they're talking to their friends? Now, how many of them actually talk like that in class? We should be able to validate a student's home language, but also provide it as a learning opportunity so that they know when it's appropriate to use their home language and when not to. So we can still validate that home language and that cultural language that they bring to your classroom, and we can provide opportunities for them to use it and validate them. But we also do need to help them understand when it's appropriate to use that. And that's when we're going to get to bridge in just a minute. A is for affirmation, to make positive that which the institution and mainstream media have made negative. So if you are seeing particular races, ethnicities in a negative light in the news recently, if wearing a hoodie in class is not positive, which I still to this day do not understand. When I teach high school, I do not care if your hood is over your head. As long as you're paying attention and you're not being disruptive and you are part of my classroom community, you can have your hoodie on. Anyways, we need to affirm or make positive what the institution as in society makes negative. What does that mean? That means showcasing wonderful minorities in your subject area. If you are teaching math, Daniel today in class mentioned Fun Fact Friday, where he could promote a really wonderful mathematician who may not be a white male. If you're a scientist, I have a galore of scientists that you can discuss in your classes. Just look around your classroom right now. How many cis Caucasian individuals are on those posters in your classroom? If you are not showing individuals of color and various ethnicities doing positive things in your classroom, and I do not mean a Michael Jordan poster, I mean those that are doing the things that you want your students to be doing, reading books, writing, famous authors, famous historians, famous figures, you really need to take a look at that. Building, making the connections between the home culture and language and with the school culture and language through instructional strategy and activity. This is when I want you to start thinking about what is it that your students are bringing into your classroom and how do we build on that. I love allowing my students to use their home language in small group. Today we practiced doing a small group breakout session where my students could go around and express themselves however they want to. Another opportunity for building, if you are teaching a class with a lot of jargon or they're learning vocabulary, they could keep a personal dictionary in your class that they make, where you take an 88-cent black and white composition book. They have the vocabulary words on one side of the page, and then they have to write, the boring textbook definition. And then next to that, they put it in their own words. And then they either draw a picture or create an analogy that means something to them. Then you're giving them that opportunity to see how they can make a connection with this concept or vocabulary word to their own lives. And finally, bridging, giving the opportunities for situational appropriateness or utilization of the appropriate culture and linguistic behavior. I love showing videos of very famous people who we see in different lights. For example, President Obama, on the basketball courts with his friends playing basketball is a very different President Obama than giving the State of the Union speech. Jay-Z on stage rapping and hyping up his crowd versus giving an interview with Oprah, right? Even you at home are very different than how you might be in front of your students in the classroom. And we have to respect that. And so, because most of us will be secondary educators, it's really important that we teach our students that they need to learn how to address their teachers. They need to know how to write an email to their teachers. If these students end up going on to a technical school or to your institution or a four-year institution, we have to provide them with the skills to be successful in those institutions once they leave high school. And that's where the bridging comes in. So the first thing we're going to discuss is validating. So to validate someone, that's intentional and purposeful legitimization of the home culture of the student. Ignore that word laughter. I don't know what happened there. So take a look at this picture. We have all of us, at some point had a thought about one of the individuals in these pictures. Right? We have a Muslim who says, we're not all terrorists. A woman wearing glasses saying, I can actually see you. Imagine how many disabled individuals want to be seen. We have a woman who says, my hair is real. A woman wearing hijab saying, I will marry whoever I want. A gentleman saying, I am not a color. A man saying, I will not cut your grass. I love this one. We are all not Mexican. Not all Asians are studious, have squinty eyes, and speak the same language. And I am not white trash. We have all been guilty of taking a glance at our students and making assumptions. And we need to take a step back and recognize them as the humans that they are and what they can bring to the table and validate who they are versus the stereotypes of what society has placed upon them. We also have to affirm this, the intentional and purposeful effort to reverse negative stereotypes, images, and representation of marginalized cultures and languages promoted by the media. I mean, think about how many times Black men are only shown as amazing athletes or criminals in our media. We have to show them in a different light. Additionally, think about our Muslim students and how Muslims are represented in our media, or the LGBT community. So really take a look at what you're seeing in your newspapers and on television, and then how you are going to negate that in your own classroom by highlighting these racial, ethnic, sexually identified individuals in a positive light. And then we need to build understanding and recognizing the cultural and linguistic behaviors of students and using those behaviors to foster rapport and relationships. When a student says ain't, or you know, after their answer, or dis, or dat, or something else, don't just immediately berate them. Say, okay, I understand what you're saying, but you know, a much better way to say this, particularly in a classroom setting, would be. But then also build a relationship with them when they're not raising their hand, when they're in small groups, when you're having a one-on-one conversation with them. Allow them to code switch, allow them to use their cultural language. Celebrate when they understand the differences in using different terms to describe things. I mean, I think that that's wonderful. One of our students indicated during class today that a teacher was getting really frustrated with a student because they kept saying I be instead of I am. And so the teacher started rewarding the student every time they said I am instead of I be. And they would reward them with either like a point towards a prize or like a piece of candy. But I mean, instead of berating the student, we would celebrate when they would actually use pronouns and terms correctly. And finally, we need to bridge, providing the academic and social skills that students will need to have success beyond the classroom. We see these students more than their parents. And so we really do need to teach them life skills. When is it appropriate to use certain terminology? How do you email someone? How do you address someone? How do you ask a question? Do you raise your hand? Do you shout it out? What is the expectation that you are setting for these students? And will that meet the societal expectations of them? So really think about your classroom management expectations. Think about classwork expectations. And if you are preparing them for a job, a technical degree, a 2-year degree, a certification, or a 4-year degree in the future. This is a really wonderful illustration of how our hidden biases get in the way of being able to Vabb. So here we see 2 women, one who is wearing a bikini and high heels and walking around, and then another woman wearing a burqa. They have the exact same opinion. Everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. And then the woman in the burqa saying, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel and male-dominated culture. They have basically the same opinion of each other, and they don't even understand each other's cultures. Please check yourself. We talked about this at length in class today. Do you have a deficit monitor? This is your internal monitor that you are looking at students solely as a negative. How many of us have heard in school, and we all have, right? As teachers, as coaches, we've all heard this. If we had better students, then they would have better schools. Or our scores were good before they started coming here. Or everyone in our school seems to be doing well except for those kids. Or what is wrong with them? As soon as you start the us versus them, I have lost you. So whenever you have a really long day at school and you're like, what is wrong with my students? What's wrong with them? You really need to take a step back, take care of yourself, put on your favorite show, eat a cupcake, have a glass of wine, do what makes you happy, go for a walk, and really think about why you are talking about your students in that way. And think about it. It is not an us versus them. My classroom is a we. You are part of my community. I am part of your community. We are in this together to learn together. My job is to facilitate you understanding certain concepts and help you be successful. As soon as I start thinking about my students as they or them, then my biases can creep in and I can start to think about what's wrong with my students. This is going to be really unpopular, and I know that this is going on YouTube. But every school has the gang of teachers. And this gang of teachers is a bunch of negative Nancy's, and all they like to do is complain. They complain about what's wrong with their administration, and they like to talk about what's wrong with their students. They never talk about what's wrong with them, and they never take a step back. And these teachers are always hungry for more members of their gang. Please do not join this teacher gang. Okay? Do your very, very best to stay positive. There will be days where you are so going to want to sit with them at the table and say, oh my God, I know. Let me tell you about this student. Can you believe what came out of their mouth? I just can't get over them. They are learning they can't learn anything. They are the worst. No. As soon as those words come out of your mouth, you've joined that gang. So please, please, please be careful. Everyone's allowed to complain, but as soon as your deficit monitor turns on and all you're doing is thinking about your students in a negative light, you really do need to take a step back and think about who are your students and how can we celebrate them. Okay, so 3 steps to checking yourself. 1, check your filter. Where did the information about the other woman come from, right? Like these 2 women have these opinions about each other. Where'd they come from? Did it come from social media? Did it come from the news? Did it come from a religious organization? Like think about where you're getting your information about your students. If you're assuming that all of your students from the same neighborhood act exactly the same and are going to have the same success rate, you need to check yourself. You need to ask, what did these women believe about society? And then you need to listen to your deficit monitor and look at the situation anew. So really think about how you're going to check yourself in the future. And listen, we all do it. We all fall in the trap of having a really bad day and wondering what is wrong with our students, and then really need to take a step back and look at our students as a whole. Remember that part of Vabb is making positive and legitimate associations with culture. What part of culture has a negative connotation? And how does mainstream media depict your ethnocultural background? So think about this. What is it about your culture that media makes negative? And how could you turn that around in your own classroom? So really think about that and then apply that to your own students' culture. That's why we spend so long identifying what culture is and thinking about our own students' culture and how we're going to find out what they are, so that we can take the time to turn around the negative connotations of our students' culture. If you have time, please watch this beautiful video of how a high school ELA teacher affirms home language. She has students speaking Arabic, Farsi, and Spanish in her classroom, and she talks about all the different ways that she helps English as second language learners in her class. It's really just a wonderful short video. And then your discussion board today is, how will you apply Vabb? So based on the subject or grade you want to teach or that you do teach, how will you apply Vabb to your classroom? So students in our class, they broke out and they discussed this. Think very specifically to either your classroom environment, specific assignments that you've struggled with that you want your students to do better on, and how you're really going to connect with your students. Thank you all so much. I hope you all have a great week. We only have one discussion board due this week because it's midterms. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.